Welcome, everybody, at Impakt Center for Media Culture. Some of you might know us as the Impakt Festival. We still are the Impakt Festival, and we'll organize our upcoming festival in October, 24 to 28. But we moved to this new building early March and started Impakt Center for Media Culture here. So we'll have frequently events, gatherings, exhibitions in this building leading up to the festival. This actually already is the second event that we're organizing here in our center. The first event a month ago was on the phenomena of deepfake that some of you might know of, a very interesting event. And today we have two very interesting events coming up, a double bill. First with a presentation by the curators of the Impakt Festival 2018. And the second part of today is a presentation by the artist Mimi Onoua. And well, we'll tell more about that soon. But first, let me tell you a little bit about the first part of this session. It's a collaboration with the Utrecht School of the Art, University of the Arts, the HKU. And in the framework of this collaboration, there will be more sessions up to come. And let me first introduce you to Annika Schwarzlose, who will tell you a bit more about the collaboration that we're having with the HKU. Please welcome Annika Schwarzlose.
First of all, welcome everyone. It's very nice that you turned up in such high numbers. Makes me personally very happy. Thanks to Ion and Impakt for hosting us here today. And thanks a lot, of course, to Luba, Alex and Yasmin for coming and dedicating your time to introduce your ideas and plans for this year's Impakt Festival to all of us today. I have to say my explanation or introduction is mostly targeting now students of the HKU who are here, but maybe also for you guys from the University of Utrecht, it's also something interesting there. The topic of this year's Impakt Festival, Algorithmic Superstructures, a world by default. When I heard it, I thought it's a really interesting subject because it is a little bit something that has silently crept on us. Social media feeds and YouTube recommendations that make us change our political views, ads that chase you around the internet after you've looked at the product once, or maybe newspapers which are sort of optimizing the headlines in real time to maximize clicks, or just tiny fragment of all the different ways how algorithms are influencing us in our daily lives. And the thing is, we talk about that sometimes in our lessons. I know you guys know about that. We're living in a time where knowledge and information is not something that we necessarily lack. There's a lot of information, but knowing about something does not always mean that you know what to do with that information. So that is actually also something that I have learned in contact with my students. That's a way in which information and knowledge can also become a little bit intimidating. So, but I think art academies and also universities, of course, are exactly the right places to turn information and even intimidating knowledge into agency. So I think the goal with the seminar, which we're organizing, is to make exactly that happen, to learn a little bit more about how about these processes that influence us, but also together to develop ways how to develop agency and how to react as practicing artists. Maybe a little bit in general about the structure of the seminar. For the ones who are planning to subscribe, I think that's important. After working quite successfully last year with Tobias Revel and Natalie Kane on the subject of haunted media, We want to do a seminar this summer again. It's going to happen in the end of June, from the 18th until the 22nd. And that is kind of a first part. And in this first part, we will meet with not all, but some of the curators. And there will be lectures, there will be workshops and presentations by one, maybe even more of the artists who are invited for the festival. I think we will hear a little bit more about that from you guys soon. As a consequence of this input which you're getting, you're already asked to make some plans for work that you could develop in reaction to the subject. And after the summer, this work will be then in the second part of this seminar developed into sort of resulting artworks that can be exhibited alongside the festival program at Impakt. And the exhibition venue is planned, as last time, the Academy Gallery. Are there any questions? I'm such a teacher. Yeah? I don't have a hashtag for that, no. Okay. I think maybe about practical things, you can of course also later on just come to me and address this. There will be also afterwards a bit more time for sort of pragmatic planning questions. But first of all, I want to give the field to Yasmin, Alex and Luba. Welcome, and I'm very curious for your presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. First of all, the hashtag, since you asked so nicely, is Impakt 2018. You've just literally made it, so thank you. You might want to ask higher powers, like some of the people from technicians. Yeah, thank you. So, could we get please our slides on? So, in today's presentation, we're going to look at our topics for the Impakt Festival 2018 and to discuss what it actually means to live in the age of the post-truth, while at the same time being surrounded by very advanced algorithms, which we are not entirely sure how they work. So we're going to suggest what algorithmic superstructures are, in our view. We're going to see what kind of technologies actually stand behind them, and we're going to see how these conditions were responded by arts and media, and also give you a little preview of what we're going to put in the festival itself, what kind of artists and thinkers we're going to collaborate with. So, what are algorithmic superstructures? We imagine them as a way to think about a new kind of socio-political reality constructed entirely by computation. So already in 1960s, this highly technological Western society was first called the Information and Knowledge Society, in which this creation and manipulation of data and sharing it was considered central thing, a central drive basically to its capitalist regime. Now, half a century later, we are still in the same condition, only now we're surrounded by these big keywords, by recommendation mechanisms, by machine learning, by facial recognition, predictive analysis, etc. So the data has taken over, and the computational design of the world has finally become something that we cannot ignore anymore. This is clear also in the recent news about governments finally including artificial intelligence in an educational system, like China, for example, is very bent on making itself an artificial intelligence power state, and they included it as a compulsory part of children's education. Similar notes were also issued by the states, by the United States, by Russia, by other European countries, so it's now become official. However, just saying that algorithms profoundly change our ways in kind of invisible and ubiquitous structures would be actually to ignore the fascinating complexity that is behind it. And also to kind of acknowledge the algorithms as a known cloud-like agency which acts on its own, which is not true. Donald Trump thinks differently. As Ben Bratton recently pointed out in his fascinating quote, Donald Trump thinks that the whole age of computing has made it entirely where nobody knows exactly what's going on. Well, some people know, or at least we're trying to. So while we're at this topic, we would like to actually embrace complexity and acknowledge the dangers of speaking about technology. First of all, there is the trouble of anthropomorphizing technology, as we already mentioned, making it in a kind of Skynet, which we would hope to avoid. Another danger is assuming that technology only exists as an extension of human being, and then you get the implicit reasons why our bias gets automated, because our human thinking is so completely ingrained in these advanced algorithms that then you have, your black friend identified as a gorilla, which is not, obviously, well, there was a lot of apologies, but I'm not sure that they really changed their views on constructing these algorithms. So by looking at algorithmic superstructures, we're actually hoping to see what is being concealed behind these big keywords, artificial intelligence or machine learning. As manipulating data brings new modes of operation and also irrevocable changes to the older frameworks, we would like to challenge the idea that these modes constitute some kind of unknowable and ungraspable reality. So we would like basically to challenge the idea of post-truth. We would rather look for a sense of algorithmic realism, one that reveals the underlying structures of the world. By doing that also reveals what it means to be human. So what we're up against and why are algorithmic superstructures so opaque? Let's see. The first element of this big construction is, of course, big data. Big data is the foundation of algorithmic society. As we engage with algorithms on a daily basis and as we willingly contribute the information about ourselves, these corporations obviously get access to the big data. Then the decision-making process is delegated to the algorithm. You have to think about things like filter bubbles or recommendations mechanisms. All this has been already widely discussed. And what we think is then what happens is that culture itself becomes automated. So we're not only thinking about a society which is based on industrial automation, but on the automation of concepts and thoughts and automation of the mode of reasoning itself. Also, it's quite important to underline this big data here, because the technical success of any advanced machine learning process is based on how good and how big basically this selective set of data is. The other thing is the interface. Software is endowed by interface with the power to subtly change all things with all kinds of perception that people develop. The interface then becomes a controlling mechanism that determines the rules and norms of social and political engagement. At the same time, the interface is exactly the thing that makes the algorithmic logic behind it concealed. So it's exactly at this moment when you basically look at the website and it directs you. It's at this moment that you stop seeing the intention of the company that made this algorithm, and you just basically follow a habit or make a new habit. Then there is last component of this thing, and it's basically you, or all of us. The internet in its early years had this wonderful idealistic idea that it could be the new democracy. It could be this place where access to information is free, where everyone could freely say what they want, and we all know this utopia didn't come out exactly in the same way. So the development of attention is the most precious resource, and the rise of social media as main, basically societal structure recently, has made our world smaller, even though it technically allows more access. The recommendation system will make sure that whatever you're thinking is basically aligned with all of the people you get suggested on social media. So also at the same time, the virality of the message becomes more important than the reflection on what the message actually means and where it comes from. Not only mimetic warfare, by which, by now we're used to it, but also the political manipulation gets a lot of power here. The Cambridge Analytica case, which I'm sure you heard about, is self-explanatory.
By having hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Americans undertake this survey, we were able to form a model to predict the personality of every single adult in the United States of America. So how does this impact marketing and communications in elections? For a primary, the Second Amendment might be a popular issue amongst the electorate. If you know the personality of the people you're targeting, you can nuance your messaging to resonate more effectively with those key audience groups.
Right. So a key component...
It is right, sorry.
A key component that maybe derives out of this is algorithmic governance. And so by that, we are all aware that we are living in times of great social and political insecurity and instability. And we are witnessing the rise of new forms of populism and an increased polarization of society to both left and right, to both sides. And this has caused an active hollowing out of democratic foundations, and in its stead, a new deep gray zone system is being set in its place through what we have called algorithmic superstructures. And so they are establishing themselves as a new generative force that creates different frameworks for the traditional forms of governance. And so they have been gradually introducing new forms of hierarchies and centralized aggregates of power. This constitutes a systemic change in how power is operated. And we have seen the establishment of new techno-capitalist corporations that are deeply grounded in technological research and are geared towards the exploitation of creativity and knowledge. And governments are increasingly struggling to find or to regulate these new frameworks and find norms according to which to hold them accountable for. And so states and governments are always one step behind. They're always reacting towards what the private sector is introducing to our societies as new technologies. So algorithmic governance asks for new forms of transparency and accountability. And so algorithmic governance can be thought of as an intransparent or shadow existence of algorithms, which are never politically neutral, but through, or algorithms introduce a very new kind of injustice and violence. So the aggregation of data that Alex was referring to before, and the big data undertaking strives at capturing society as a whole, and to capture the population at large. And this endeavor is underpinned by the intention to produce sophisticated statistical models that will characterize and simulate and predict basically what is going to happen. But so these models are based on correlations of data. And this correlation is becoming a source of new information and knowledge generation. And essentially what the correlation of data of society allows for is the assemblage of profiles of individuals that groups people to determine normal from abnormal behavior. And so the implementation of these predictive analytics aims to determine forms of social deviation which then are being acted upon, and this is called preemption. So it is acting upon a probability rather than an actual possibility. And so this is highly problematic, especially when we consider politics of post-truth, since probabilities and correlations create a whole new form of facticity and a new form of actuality that is being constructed from them. And this reasoning constitutes a break from linearity and from a traceable chain of cause and effect. And this disrupts traditional ways of how reality is being created. And from it, derives a probabilistic reality that stands in place of truth and objectivity. So, because of this rationale, algorithms create what we've called a deep truth that offers new forms of observation of reality and a new experience of our surroundings. And so we come to a new politics of the sensible. So in consequence, we can determine a reconstruction or a remodeling of the fabrics of our common experience through algorithmic superstructures. By altering the rules of human experience and social functioning, a gradual reframing or suspension of our field of sensibility is in the making. So algorithmic superstructures overlay a framework that alters the visible and the invisible regimes of sensibility. This means that algorithmic superstructures affect the forms of how speech is circulated, of how visibility is exposed, and the production of affect, and all of which create this new sensorium and new sensibility of the real. And they work, or algorithmic superstructures work to reframe the world of common experience in which new possibilities to construct subjectivities, sensibilities are being developed, essentially. So what we're trying to do with algorithmic superstructures and during the festival then is really to address this condition of algorithmic superstructures and established them or analyzed it as a new operative force. And so we will investigate the architecture and forms of reasoning behind algorithmic superstructures and show current developments and implications that come with these superstructures. So we want to investigate visible and invisible narratives and counter-narratives that arise from them, and question the very logic that lies behind algorithmic superstructures and find alternative entry points. Yes, so I would like to hand over to Luba, who will give a more a technical introduction to the festival theme.
Yeah, thank you, Yasmin and Alex. So I get to talk about the technological side and also how artists are using this technology to make art. So, yeah, first of all, why is AI such a big thing now? And this is because 3 things have recently improved. So we now have a lot of data, partly thanks to our addiction to computers and our devices here as well. And secondly, because the algorithms have improved. So about 6 years or so ago, deep learning and neural networks started to come into fashion, and they are able to work with huge amounts of data to generate various recommendations, images, texts, and so on. And then the third component is the computing power. So I don't know how many of you are gamers, but NVIDIA has been producing graphics cards for some time, and then they realized that it's actually not a bad idea to sell those to the people who are using and training algorithms. So yeah, thanks to data, improved algorithms, and NVIDIA's improved processing units, we can now make the most of AI to an extent. Okay, how many of you have seen this image or might have some idea what neural networks or deep learning mean? Oh, Joanna, and a couple of others. Good. Well, so neural networks or deep learning are a family of kind of algorithms that are loosely inspired on how the human brain works. And basically, they learn patterns in the data that you feed them. And then they kind of keep learning and generate images, texts, or kind of results based on that data. And there is also this family of algorithms called reinforcement algorithms, and they are based on kind of the psychological, dynamics of having rewards and improving the system based on that. And now I'm going to give you some examples of what AI can do, or has done recently. So there was this AlphaGo thing that is a model that was developed by DeepMind in, I think, 2016. And it was able to beat Lee Sedol, who was the kind of reigning champion in the Chinese game of Go. So you can see that's kind of the Go game in the middle. And I think it has so many different possible combinations of moves that this number is higher than the number of atoms in the universe, or something like that. So it's a crazy huge number of combinations, and for a computer to beat a human there is like a huge achievement, or certainly to the technical community. And then there are things like these, which is when these deep learning algorithms are used to help medical professionals in their work. So they can help locate various, they can help identify perhaps malignant cells or other kind of things in those images, and then help the radiologist make a decision. And then, we have all these recommendation algorithms that help you find new things to watch on Netflix, or new songs to listen on Spotify, or additional stories to read on, on Facebook. And of course, this is sometimes problematic, because if you're an independent artist or filmmaker and your film or song doesn't kind of fit what is considered popular or successful by the algorithm, then you're probably not going to get very many views unless you have an audience who is willing to sometimes neglect all these algorithmic suggestions and proactively go and try new things. And then there are some of the more scarier things that can, I guess, happen. And there was a research paper that came out of Stanford at the end of last year about a neural network that is able to identify a gay face based on images. And I know the technical community didn't find the research to be good enough to make this conclusion, but that of course doesn't stop the media from picking this up and kind of course as a society we can become worried about the potential impacts even if the technological results aren't quite there. And now I'm going to move to some artists who use machine learning in their practice. Do these works remind you of anything? Any artist? Francis Bacon? Very good. That's what I like to hear. So these are some works made by Mario Clingerman in his Post-to-Picture series. And they are based actually on a lot of images, I think, that are not suitable for work. So these images were generated from stick figures and have nothing to do with Bacon, and they are also all kind of completely digital. But of course, you as a viewer can kind of realize that the faces are all mashed up, the body components are a little bit distorted in places. So we can very easily link this to Francis Bacon. But whenever I talk to Mario Clingerman, he always tells me that Francis Bacon has nothing to do with it. And it's just kind of the way the neural network has decided to kind of generate images in the best possible way it could based on the data and the model used. And here is some more of his work. It's called the Makeover Net series. And in this piece, there were two data sets. One was a set of contemporary female selfies. And the other was a set of black and white male yearbook photographs. And so based on the algorithm, these are the images that were generated, and you can see kind of the male faces becoming a bit more gender fluid, and you can also see the positions of various facial components become a little bit off. So the mouth is lopsided. I don't know what happened to the nose, and the fringe is kind of all sticking up. So this is kind of an example of one of these neural network models and what it was able to do at a certain point in time. And now some of the work Mario Clingerman does is is aesthetically quite different, and that of course is partly due to different data sets, also partly because some of the technologies have improved to create more realistic faces. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Anna Riddler's work, and she is actually standing over there, and she is our Impakt artist in residence. And I like to include Anna's work because she is one of the artists who is really thinking about the dataset component. So all this stuff that is fed into the machine to generate more images. And in Anna's work, Fall of the House of Usher, Anna watched this film, Fall of the House of Usher, which is a black and white 1928 film based on the work of Edgar Allan Poe. And she made 200 or 300 ink drawings, like this one here. And then she used the neural network to generate images in the style of her work. And I remember from speaking to Anna, it's always interesting to hear what the algorithm has learned about her practice. So that, for example, that there are similarities between the way Anna draws eyebrows and eyes, and sometimes secondary objects appear or disappear from the background because to Anna they might have been not so important because they are background things, but this is something that is kind of carried through with the algorithm. And while Anna is in Utrecht, she is working with Tulips to create a work called the Mosaic Virus, which is one of our commissions for the festival. And Anna has taken, I believe, 1,500 photos, 15,000, that's what I meant. Yes, so 15,000 photographs of tulips. And then she has been training some of these neural networks to generate images based on that, to create more of a modern version of the Dutch still life, and to also link it to speculation and the Bitcoin. Ooh, let's see if there is a video that works. Yes. This is a short video clip from the auto-encoding Blade Runner project, which was done by Terry Broad, who is, who was a...
This is a bad one.
They're talking.
Worst yet. There was an escape from the off-world colonies 2 weeks ago. 6 replicants, 3 male, 3 female.
Oops. Well, anyway, I'm going to continue talking about the project there. But it's just going to be black. So you saw that there were 2 parts there. So the part on the left was the original Blade Runner film, and then the part on the right was the reconstructed version. And so what this artist did was, Terry Broad trained an algorithm on the Blade Runner film and got it to learn kind of what it sees and then reconstruct the film frame by frame. And you can see that the reconstructed version is kind of blurry in places, and some things are reconstructed better than others. But it was also interesting enough to see this work get picked up by the Warner Brothers copyright team as a problem. And Terry Broad got a message asking this project to be taken off YouTube. So I'm going to show it again. quickly. Yeah, so that's the reconstructed version. And yeah, there's also this project by Ben Grossa from 2013, which is also about computers watching movies. And it's a sketching process kind of based on what the machine sees and considers important. So yeah, this is a preview of our technical-based artists who will be part of our program. And at this point, I will hand over to Alex, who will tell you more things.
Things. How specific. Yeah, at this point, I think it would be good to tell you about the visual regimes of PostTruth, because we had a very brilliant introduction into what kind of computational image you encounter. So I'm also going to talk a little about the film program of the festival. Sorry, I just was shown a sign with 5 minutes left, so I can do it. So basically, what is the first thing that you think about when, for example, I ask you about forms of truth and reflection of reality in moving images? What comes to your mind? What kind of genres with the moving image? Yes, thank you. So basically, moving image has a long history of confronting truth states and various truth claims, much longer than computation has been doing it. So basically, even in traditional forms of addressing the truth with photography, it was very early on that the indexical relation to reality was some kind of a given, that photography somehow could represent truth. Then later, when you would think about, for example, moving image and exactly documentary genre, you would also question the documentary's access to the real, because it's always constructed, it's always putting some kind of point of view. It's never exactly truthful. But also, I was trying to think of a good, interesting concept to give you and also to kind of use in the film program. And there's a definite movement from this postmodernist idea of basically a hyper-reality, when nothing is real because everything is real, so everything is equally virtual, which is already a bit outdated and not too useful. But there is one concept in documentary suggested by Werner Herzog of ecstatic truth. So ecstatic truth is something that it's a truth that is deeper than the observation of reality. And Erika Balsam also calls it contingent truth, sorry. And she talks about the films that, for example, experimental documentaries that took up strategies of reenactment, of docufiction, essay films, this kind of heightened subjectivism, instead of trying to be entirely rational. So I think that these methods are being actively used, also by the artists who are often mentioned in connection to this kind of documentary turn in art, that essay film is currently very strong, and you can see this production of truths as fictions is actually taken over. So I'm going to show you a few minutes from the film that we're going to screen at the festival by Christian von Boris, who is a German composer and director, who also works with AI. This film is called Desert of the Real, and it is a very good entry point into this kind of virtual condition of reality. It's being really straightforward about it. So Christian went to Abu Dhabi, where largest weapons fair, like trade fairs, happening, and he basically just brought footage of places where simulation happens in physical space. Okay. So you can see here a replica of Venice in a Chinese mall, actually, a shopping mall. And the film is very poignant because it often shows people taking selfies. So, you know, people who insert themselves into this environment somehow. From other examples, I'm going to be now very short on this program. I can mention Matty Haven, who you probably are familiar with, who is very famous for their work with this kind of layers of fiction and propaganda, and also the production of truths that are uncertain. And also one of the screenings, a few screenings actually, are inspired by this glitch myth that has not just been used by artists since Nam June Paik in the 60s, where it wasn't even digital, but also used as a kind of funny myth-making. And, of course, my favorite artist of all times, Ian Cheng, who is working with game engines and simulations, who is also kind of creating this, using this technology as a black box, which not only just makes first-person shooter games, but also highly complex, highly elaborate generative worlds, that basically life simulations that develop indefinitely. Okay, so we used to have one last part about the democratical aspect, the state of politics on, five. Oh, okay, super. So thank you for graciously allowing us 5 minutes, and I'm, yes.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about deep democracy, which is one aspect of algorithmic superstructures that is very much reliant on what I had said before on algorithmic governance, or that resolves from algorithmic governance. And so from what has been said before, you must have gathered that algorithmic superstructures are crystallizing as an overarching framework that change and challenge the fabrics of our society, introducing changing the very understanding of what democracy and democratic processes are, including also media ecology and collective action. So you might have heard the term deep state before. Deep state is a form of a state within a state in which the transparency of popular democracy is revoked, and the electoral process of accountability and legitimacy is being overtaken by forms of intransparent decision-making. And so what I refer to as deep democracy refers to a more technological reading of deep state that refers rather more to how algorithms and new forms of technology are imposing themselves on democratic institutions and forms of decision-making. And so in many aspects of the exhibition, for example, we want to show or imagine how a future of democracy might look like. So here is an artist, for example, that has called or that has imagined or termed the phrase parametric democracy as a form of state and corporation, in which the state and corporations are rendered obsolete and taken over by a network that makes global decisions on each and every state action, as well as personal life. So this AI is governing the world and is becoming like an inherent voice of the people. I would have wanted to show you an excerpt of it, but let's skip that. Okay, another form of how we could imagine forms of democracy, perhaps in a more utopian form or a more positivistic interpretation of it, is what this artist Paulo Scirio has tried to do in reconciling technology and forms of democracy. And he has created basically 15 graphs that incorporate the different aspects that constitute the democratic complex, and has weaved new forms of how the democratic apparatus could work. So each of the nodes you see is one emblem, one new form of democratic institution that that could possibly help us, it's a prototype democracy. Of course, a very important aspect is citizenship, and how new forms of valuation of the individual are being constructed through algorithmic superstructures. And so previously, we are born with one national identity, with one or two passports, but more and more you can buy yourself into a nationality. There are already forms of ways and forms in which you can acquire a national identity. And here this artist has been critically been engaged in what she has called liquid citizenship, in which it looks like an app store where you can purchase and acquire your own, or where you can buy a citizenship according to the traits of the country that you prefer. And well, so this is now very, very brief, and maybe I can answer or elaborate on that in the Q&A, but so far so good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yasmin, and I would like to invite the curators on stage. Thanks for all your presentations. This is a Q&A, question and answer, so whoever has questions, raise your hand, and we will try to answer them. There are no stupid questions, also no stupid answers, so feel free. Maybe, okay. I think it was already quite a bit clear from the presentation, but let's maybe start with what the various roles in the festival are. You talked, Yasmin, about the exhibition, so that's your main responsibility. You talked a little bit about the film program, had much more to tell, but we're a bit short in time. So Alex, you're doing the film program, and Luba, you're mainly involved with the talks, the presentations, but as a team, you're closely collaborating on all parts of the presentation. I think the presentation included many terms that some of you might not be familiar with, like a neural network or algorithms. Well, I can only say maybe for those who are not interested in algorithms, the algorithms are interested in you. So I think it's very good to know about them. And behind this maybe sometimes very abstract world, I think there's a very fascinating and relevant reality that we're right in. So it's important, but also I think very inspiring to learn more about the algorithmic superstructures and how they relate to our allegedly post-truth era. if there's a question, just raise your hand. I'll gladly stop. There is Julia with the microphone, and she will come to you so you can ask your question. While not, I'll just fire away with my questions. Maybe to start with... Okay, well... Yes.
Hey, thanks all for a very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, it seems to be a natural reflex to kind of state how these algorithms might lead to all kinds of dystopian futures. And I was just wondering and kind of prodding you a little bit, can you perhaps also ruminate a little on the potential utopian ideas, if not only the ideas that the engineers and the programmers and the coders might have? So that's just an open question to you.
Yay, I think you asked the right question. Yes, so certainly I feel that there's been a lot of critical dystopian thinking concerning algorithms and AI, particularly from the art world and the sensationalist media. But yeah, there are plenty of opportunities how we can create utopian futures as well. So in terms of using the technology, it can be beneficial in various tasks, ranging from helping to diagnose diseases to kind of optimizing train schedules and so on, which can help us live our daily lives more smoothly, to kind of looking at the more artistic process side. So some of the art projects I showed, the algorithms there can be used to kind of help artists learn more about their practice, such as kind of in the case of Anna. One thing I didn't mention was that after she has trained a neural network on all her images, she also went and made drawings from that image, from the machine-generated images, and then kind of put them through the system again. So that kind of helps her learn more about her practice. And then when you have this opportunity to generate lots of images or texts at the click of a button, then that also enables you to just have some of this stuff very quickly, and you can also personalize based on the data that is created for individuals.
Maybe I would add a little note about dystopian versus utopian futures, because I think we also in our team we have varying degrees of techno-optimism, which I think play out quite well, because then we can provide, you know, a varied view rather than just one. So with thinking about kind of utopia, on one hand you have Elon Musk, who is ready to go to Mars with his new girlfriend. Have you heard that, by the way? Grimes, yes, dating over algorithms. Anyway, on the other hand you have Blade Runner or something else, you know? So, and we making a case for third option, which is actual complexity, which is like actual messy stuff that happens, and we're kind of happy to get into it and happy to tease out some interesting things from within the algorithmic, rather than just put, you know, like in the boxes, the algorithmic itself. Is that right? Any comments?
If there's no question, I have a next question, which is about algorithmic governance, and that's it touches a bit on the dystopian and utopian options and whatever is, and all the things, the options in between. And Yasmin, you talked a bit about that aspect. I think it's very interesting to see how some people plea for less governance or more freedom, and some for more governance, how governance is often associated also with repression, where at the same time with less governance, I mean, it's on the one hand sometimes a very right-wing libertarian voice that asks for less governance. How do you see, what perspectives do you see, and how can democratic societies deal with this question of governance? Yeah. And maybe then largening that to technology, government related to technology, so it doesn't need to be exclusively
I'm not sure if I have understood correctly. So you're asking if we should have more or less, and or how governments react to algorithmic decision-making processes, or?
Yes, and what kind of freedom they should allow, especially companies, and the way commercial parties use algorithms. Is there, should we have more legislation, a stricter control by governance over these?
There are many aspects to this question. First of all, it has very much to do with a moral or an ethical dilemma that we're currently in. So there is very little regulation on how the technology is produced, and for example, with self-driving cars, for example, who decides or who encodes their moral and ethical understandings in those algorithms that in a split second will have to make a decision, possibly on life and death of one over the other. And this is definitely something that needs a regulatory system that needs to be set in place. This is only one example of many, but in another form I could answer to your question is that there needs to be more interaction, more transparency from both sides, from government side as well as from the technological side, as to how they cooperate and what is being developed, and what the consequences of those technologies produced will be. So, for example, recently it was leaked that Google is now analyzing the military footage that the US Army is producing, and so we have probably the most powerful technological company in the world that is now involved in military operations. So where does this leave us? I don't know, does that answer?
Yeah, transparency, accountability, I think also early in the presentations are key words, but I wonder sometimes if governance have enough knowledge to understand what technology nowadays actually can do, what tech companies can do. How do you see that? Isn't a very crucial point that we make sure that the people that represent us in democratic systems understand what these technologies can do for the good or for the bad?
No, I definitely believe there needs to be more education from the ground up, so from school education as to what programming, what software can do, and to teach people the tools to deal with this new society and era that we are living in, to give people agency over the devices that we are using. So this literacy of technology is a very, very important part that we are still lacking at the moment, that most people probably, at least even in my age, are. I cannot program. If the computer doesn't do what it needs to do, I'm completely, thrown off. But I agree with you also, politics is overwhelmed by the complexity of technology at the moment, and that's why it can only react to it and cannot foresee what the implications of a new software is. And either there needs to be an ethical board, or I don't know, an entity that oversees production of software to be able, like in legislation, when you produce legislation, there is always a form of debate that weighs the pros and cons. perhaps, I mean, this will slow down the private sector and this will not happen. But yeah, I don't know. There needs to be more accountability of some form and a way to grasp it more. And I think that education from the grounds up is key to that. So digital literacy.
Well, let's hope that the festival can contribute to that. Of course, it's one of also the connection with art, opening up to more imaginative and visual approaches to these dilemmas. If there's no question from the audience, there's one.
Thank you for the presentations. I had a question about you were tapping into the subject of law. How do you see a political being politically active or activism as a role to reach out and bring people in contact with that complexity? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, we hope to have a special space for one particular kind of political activism in this algorithmic governance theme. We hope to invite an artist by a very long pseudonym, Pankes Dada or Omsk Social Club, who is doing a practice called LARPing. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah, so LARPing is basically, it's a role-playing, in a very traditional sense, a role-playing based on some kind of fantasy world, but she uses it particularly as a kind of interesting way of activism, which is, I think, a lot of pedagogical potential in a way that we also been trying to think of in terms of digital literacy, etc. But what she does, she builds a situation. I mean, her work's actually quite abstract because it's very hard to describe what she actually does because you only understand it when you're inside it. And I had the privilege to be inside a similar space by her, which was basically involved getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning. In Berlin, we did some kind of summer school, and coming to a space which she constructed, and she suggested some rules. And the rules were at the point concerning a kind of reverting the hierarchy of the summer school in which we took part, which was pretty much like one person speaking at the audience and the audience pretty much receiving. So she constructed an interesting space where everyone could make from the very basic level new structures of behavior. And she's also thinking about it as some kind of algorithm, like a social algorithm that you are building for yourself. So I mean, it's a large topic, but I think this is just a very nice example of how algorithmic logic is not necessarily digital. And when you think about political activism, especially, it needs to really be embodied, I think, and it needs to be really inbuilt in the space to be maximally effective. So we hope to incorporate that as a part of the festival.
Hi, thanks for the question. I never heard the term deep democracy before, and I love it. Deep democracy. But what I worry about is a lot of what we see technology used for by activists is, identifying corruption, identifying the imperfect, tearing something down. And we really saw this in the Arab Spring. It was amazing what was torn down, but then nothing was built up. Not by the activists. So there was no better structure that replaced it. So unfortunately, the deep state came back and created the new governments. And maybe they're a little less corrupt. I don't know. I don't think so in many cases. But maybe I'm not sufficiently informed. But I know that their first acts were terrible, death and imprisonment and things. So is there, in the work that you guys are aware of, is there works on, I don't know if we need an alternative structure or do we need to better improve, because of course you also did a great job of talking about the use of AI by autocracies to enforce conformity. But is there anybody working on a new collaborative structure which is neither about tearing down nor about enforcement, but somehow about actually building?
Yes, I'm not sure I have an answer to this, but yeah, from what I understand, there are a lot of artists who often think about the new visions that the world could look like. So, for example, there's an artist called Lawrence Leck that has created a vision of Singapore in 2050, where there is a satellite that kind of flies above the Earth and then kind of comes down and decides to be an artist. So he made a film kind of envisioning what that scenario could look like. But of course, that is a little bit different from bringing that into reality and making that happen. But still, it can serve to inspire policymakers or us as individuals to imagine new visions of the world and then somehow work to make those happen. Maybe you have some other ideas?
I think I cannot give you a straight answer to this, but we are at a really crucial point, and I think what critical thinkers are trying to do at the moment is move past binaries and categorizations of humans as they have been done by algorithms up to now, and find new entry points, finding new entry points into the thematics that allows for more flux, more to create more open, more dynamic systems. Because what is problematic about these algorithms is that they are quite rigid, even though they are based on machine learning, and the learning is supposed to be an inherent and continuous process. They are still, it's very, very hard to retrain them on, or it takes a lot of labor. So how can we think and how can we create a system and a model that allows for a repurposing or new impulses to go, to be allowed inside the system? And how can we bring in more possibility rather than probability? This whole idea of statistics and how we envision a future action based on what is most likely going to be good or bad, true or false, that how can we move away from this rigid understanding, this thinking? How can we allow for a more dynamic reasoning? And this is also what we're trying to do, but I believe many thinkers at the moment, be it artists, be it in critical theory, are looking for these new entry points, because we have come to a point where the media has so sensationalized of this, the narrative is so stagnant at the moment. There is nothing new added to the narrative. We knew what Cambridge Analytica was capable of before the sensation in the media. This was nothing new. So how can we alter that narrative? And yeah, this is something we are trying to do in the festival, but all the artists that are being part of the, and many more do think, about these, and hopefully we'll find.
Thanks, Jasmine. We're running a bit out of time, so sorry for cutting you short. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Luba, for introducing your program to us. We'll have a short break, and after the break there's a second part of today's program. The first part was a collaboration with the Utrecht School of the Arts, and the second part is a collaboration with Utrecht University, so we're very happy with that. Mimi Unohua will be our special guest. It's an event that we're co-organizing with Fiber, so you'll also get a short introduction on the Fiber Festival in Amsterdam. Hope to see you back in 10 minutes in this hall. Thanks.